Do you feel frustrated trying to grow your franchise? Are you having trouble balancing your consumer and franchise development marketing? Do you wish there was an easier way? Imagine if you had a proven roadmap to take your franchise's marketing from costing you to making you money. That's why we've created the Franchise Growth Blueprint. We walk you through the exact same process that we use to run franchise marketing campaigns for our clients at scale that has resulted in triple-digit growth. This blueprint isn't for anyone. It's not for people just starting a franchise. It's not for franchises without long-term goals. This is for franchises that want to scale up their marketing in a predictable and profitable way using a proven roadmap. If you want to sell more franchises, keep your current franchisees happy, and learn from people who have already done it, go to franchisegrowthblueprint.com and sign up today. That's franchisegrowthblueprint.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. Very excited to have Bob Fish, the CEO and co-founder of BIGGBY Coffee. They are one of the fastest growing gourmet coffee franchises in the United States, and they're actually the only coffee concept to make it on the Franchise Business Review's list of top 40 franchises to own. Bob, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
So I did a quick intro to you, but for those who don't necessarily know your background or the background of BIGGBY Coffee, I'd love for you to share a bit more with them.
Sure. And I have to correct because I'm also co-CEO. So it's not just co-founder, but co-CEO. My partner and I co-manage the business, which is a very unique relationship, but has worked out really well for us for the last 25 years. And so on that note, I'll segue. We started 25 years ago in East Lansing, Michigan, and we opened our first cafe there March 15th, 1995. And pretty early in the specialty coffee arena, frankly. I think Starbucks was just coming out of Seattle, maybe landing in Chicago or something like that. And we started with one location, then we opened the second one in 97, and then by 1999, with a whopping 2 units, we decided to franchise. And then we've been growing ever since. So we're at 250 units open and operating today. In 9 states, and even through this sort of dire moment in time with COVID-19, we just signed a deal yesterday, and we signed a deal last week, and then we're still opening stores. So we're opening a store in North Carolina next week.
Wow, that's it's very good to hear growth stories in crazy times like these. You know, I know one of the reasons why I reached out to you is because I heard that you were doing AMAs every day, which I absolutely loved. It helps with the transparency, keeping everyone on the same page. Do you care to elaborate a bit more on that, on how you're helping manage the COVID-19 crisis among your franchisees?
Yeah. I mean, there's 3 meetings that we do. They were every day, but as you know, some of the problems are solved. We don't need that kind of frequency anymore, but certainly right out the gate, they were every day. We had something called a COVID task force, and on that, we held that every day at noon for 1 hour, and that was just key, sophisticated owner-operators inside our community, helping us sort of pre-vet some of the more serious problems and approaches to those problems. And then, something that one always has to manage inside a franchise system is the ad fund. And we saw a 50% dip in revenue. And so that meant a 50% dip in, ad fund revenue also. And so that budget had to be completely re-wrangled, and some decisions had to be made in terms of, where we were going to invest in technology to help us during this moment in time. What kind of money do we want to preserve for, what we called, reboot, when things opened back up. We wanted to make sure to have a good some good cash laying there so that we could market and so on and so forth. So that group was really tasked with that kind of thing and solving safety and sanitation. The second meeting we did at 3:30 every day. and that we call a town hall. And the town hall meeting was 100% of our franchise system on a Zoom call. Everybody's gotten really familiar with Zoom these days. And, even though we had the task force, there were some really localized problems we needed to solve. And what we were doing there was, by having everybody on the call, was certainly pumping out information. A lot of procedural processes needed to change right away. And, our old method would have been to post it here and you go read it and all this kind of thing. And we needed a much more dynamic and sort of fluid communication channel. And so we would still post it and everything, but we would have open dialogue about that in these town hall meetings. The other thing was, our owner operators were flat out afraid, and cortisol was pumping through their veins, and they had a lot of questions and a lot of fears, and we were able to address that as a leadership team in real time every day, and that was really valuable. And then the other thing was, there was some supply chain disruption, and then there was some things that needed to change from a safety sanitation perspective. So let's say, some of our stores needed to put up plexiglass. Well, in the old days, maybe we would have centralized that and brought it in, and then they would order it, and we needed to move a lot quicker than that. So we really sort of crowdsourced these problem-solving things, like where to get plexiglass in this region or that region, and so on and so forth. I think everybody ran into the deal where sanitizer was real scarce, and so owner operators solved that problem by going to some of these craft distilleries that were really local, and we took it out of the supply chain process altogether. So just really rapid response is the way I would say that. So we always said we wanted connectivity, we wanted care, and we wanted communication, and those were our three missions on that. The AMA went beyond owner operators. So in our business, we have a lot of stakeholders, just like any other business. We have consumers are a stakeholder to us, our owner operators are a stakeholder, our vendors are a stakeholder, our owner operator communities are stakeholders, home office is one. And so the AMA was for all the stakeholders, right? And so that was basically a public meeting where my partner and I, Mike McFall, co-CEO, co-founder, we would just get on and we would take questions from baristas. So, through the town hall, we might have communicated directly with the owner operator, but through the AMA, we had the opportunity to answer baristas' concerns, and their concerns were about their own safety and what's being done about it, and is it even moral for them to be working? And we were dealing with those kinds of questions, as well as consumers that essentially had the same concerns as the baristas did. And then vendors popped on, and as a result of one of our AMAs, one of our vendors, a tea vendor actually, donated 9 pallets of tea to our owner operators to help them out and get it to first responders and stuff like that. So, the AMA could be considered a little risky because sometimes when you communicate, you might communicate one way to one constituency and another way to another constituency, and the AMA gives you no breathing room on that. And we actually prefer that. It doesn't work for all companies, but we think we have one voice, one opinion, one guideline, and that we just need to share that with everybody, and then folks can make their own decisions about what they want to do or not.
Mm-hmm. I love that one voice, one opinion,
yeah.
Type level. So with all these stakeholders in the AMAs, how did you manage things from a transparency level, from a logistical level? I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah. So, I think as a company, we are probably one of the most transparent companies. And so, we'd start the AMA with an update on where, the status of our owner operators. Right now, our system has 76% of the stores operating, which means we have some that are temporarily closed. But, we gave that update. We had to initially lay off 50 of our 70 staff at the home office. We gave that update. Since PPP, we've brought those folks back. And we had to have conversations about, what the governor was saying, and what the governor was really asking us to do by being an essential business and being essential workers and so on. And just all we do is just lay it all right out there. So transparency for us comes pretty easy. We've been doing it for a long time. I think if you hit this crisis and now suddenly decide to be transparent, that might be a little difficult. But since 2014, we had become a company that sort of would fall into a category of conscious capitalism. And one of the tenets is full transparency on everything that's going on inside the company with all stakeholders. And generally, one of the tenets of conscious capitalism is that when you make decisions, there's no single stakeholder that sort of takes it and has to eat it, right? So what you're always looking to do is create a win-win-win situation, right? And so just much different than a very traditional corporation where traditionally it's the shareholder that benefits the most. It's not even the customer, it's not even the franchisee, it's not even their workers or their community. Usually it's the shareholder that does. And so what we're trying to do is when we make decisions, to make decisions that can be a win for everybody.
And how do you balance these expectations of and pressures from these multiple stakeholders with conscious capitalism at the top of your mind?
Yeah, well, when you have one voice and one opinion, and you're not trying to bifurcate your messaging, there's nothing to balance, right? So what I would say about a decision is that there is never a decision that's all good, right? And so typically when you're making decisions, if you were to put it on a piece of paper, you would write down the pros on one side and the cons on the other. And every decision, the final decision, typically has pros and cons. And what you're trying to do is find the decision that has the most amount of pros and the least amount of cons. And then in a transparency perspective, what you do is you just disclose all the pros and cons and why you made that decision. And then it gets pretty easy at that point.
We'll get right back to the show, but do you feel frustrated trying to grow your franchise? Are you having trouble balancing your consumer and franchise development marketing? Do you wish there was an easier way? Imagine if you had a roadmap to take your franchise's marketing from costing you to making you money. That's why we've created the Franchise Growth Blueprint. To find out more, visit franchisegrowthblueprint.com. That's franchisegrowthblueprint.com. Now back to today's episode. Very cool. Very cool. So we're talking about stakeholders, and you're in a very unique situation where you have a co-CEO. How do you manage that? How do you make sure you're not stepping on each other's toes and you're continuously in sync with each other, moving in the same direction?
Yeah, I mean that's learned behavior, and what I would say is it's not a lot different than being married, right? So, whereas my partner Mike says, he says it's like being married but without the hanky panky, So, but when you're in a relationship, whether that's in business or in your personal life, as an individual, you have an obligation to carry the water in the relationship, and the other person has a responsibility to carry the water too. Where it gets difficult is usually in communication, right? So, feelings get hurt or somebody feels slighted. How do you create an environment to communicate that without, becoming an emotional basket case about it, right? So, and that's just a learned technique that one can develop. So, if I'm taking something a certain way that Michael is saying, it's my obligation to bring that up, and then we just talk about it and figure out why I was feeling that way and why he might have said it that way, and usually there's nothing in it. There was nothing in it, and it just goes away and you move on, right? And but try to apply that in my personal life, try to apply that in my public life regularly. And I think in business, we look at IQ a lot, sort of your intelligence quotient. And, one of the things that people are never taught and need the most work on, though, is their emotional quotient. And so that's sort of what I'm driving at here, is that to get good at this, you have to have emotional quotient skills.
For sure. So switching gears a bit, in this podcast is primarily focused on growth and marketing.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned at the start of our conversation that, you're still opening up franchises.
Yeah.
So care to share about how you've seen the franchise development process from a sales and marketing perspective change as the COVID-19 crisis has evolved?
Yeah, sure. So, just as this COVID thing started happening, we had, an in-person open house all scheduled to go, and that got canceled right away. We did it virtually, just like this right here. I almost think it turned out better than the in-person one in some ways. A little less on the sell bell, and a little bit more on just informing people about who we are, what it's about, and we have a business model, and our business model is pretty straightforward. We're a coffee shop that serves the community. But what's really important to communicate to folks in the sales process is, what is your culture, and what does that mean to you, and how serious are you about it? And is that just a marketing message, or is it really embedded in the DNA of the organization? And so that's where we spend most of our time. And we think that's really sort of a self-select in or self-select out kind of deal. So we're, I don't want to say we're radical, but we like using the word love in business a lot, and so on and so forth. And either you're going to be about that as a potential franchisee, or you're not going to be about that. And we're all about getting the people that are about that on our team.
Cool. And how have you found the process of scaling out and identifying, this, let's call it love culture,
Mm-hmm.
From people who don't necessarily have it as you continue to grow?
Yeah, so I'm not sure I understand the question exactly. Can you reframe that?
Yeah, sure. So how have you found finding people that fit your culture as you expand your
Gotcha.
franchise?
Yeah. Well, again, in franchising, the sales process, we always say is a big funnel, right? And you're narrowing people down constantly until out comes a real prospect. And so, initially we don't really muck about with communicating that, except that if somebody were to do a little research on BIGGBY Coffee online, you definitely land on our website, hear all about it. And if you've been a customer, you would already know about it, and so on. But we just educate you as you go along about who we are, and then either you're in or you're not.
Cool. Very cool. So what advice would you give someone just starting out in the franchise world as a franchisor?
That's a great question. So it kind of depends, where you are in that just getting started out process. I mean, when we had 2 stores and we started franchising, Mike and I were, chief cook and bottle washer. There was no home office. We did it directly from the stores, and we meet people in the stores, and nothing better than just being in your operation to talk about franchising. But and I don't know how most folks get started, but when we started a concept, and then we became a franchise company. Mm-hmm. And so one of the bits of advice is this: that when you transition from running a business to running a franchise, you're no longer running that business. You're in the franchise business at that point. And the sooner that you can come to that realization, the more efficient you'll be as a franchisor serving your franchise community. So it's a pretty hard transition, because if you built a business up and it's your baby and so on and so forth, you have a lot vested in it operationally and from a marketing perspective and so on and so forth. But you have to segue to becoming a good franchisor, right? A good teacher, and a good shepherd, basically. So the other thing is that's really, really important is just hyper focus, right? So there's a lot of squirrels out there that you could be chasing, and in the early days of franchising, it's really not that profitable. It's really not that financially feasible, and you have to get to a certain number of units for it to be feasible for you. In other words, to provide income for your family, to provide stability of resources to your owner operators, and so on and so forth. And so it's just really important to stay focused on building that franchise community as quickly as possible.
Cool, very cool. So Bob, we are nearing the end of the episode, and I always like to end episodes with what I call a lightning round. So it's just very quick questions coming at you. Again, I promise no hardballs. They're very easy. So first question is, what is your favorite tool or app that you can't live without?
Right now, Zoom.
Good choice. Good choice. What is your favorite book?
Conscious Capitalism by Raj Soda.
Very cool. Who is?
I have to give another one. E-Myth is like number one too, especially if you're getting into franchising. Yeah.
Yeah, I love E-Myth. I've read it a few times now.
Yeah.
Who is the franchise leader that you look up to most?
Well, he's passed away, but I was very fond of Fred DeLuca, who started Subway franchise sandwiches, and had the opportunity to spend time with him 3 or 4 times in the last decade prior to his passing. And he was very, very influential to us. And we've always tried to stay connected with franchise community leaders, and it's been really beneficial to build that kind of scaffolding around us.
Sure. And last question is, where can people find out more about you and your company?
Yeah, so it's always BIGGBY.com. That's the easy place. I also keep a blog called One Big Island in Space, and that's spelled with 2 G's. But there, I take a little different twist on the company. It's not so BIGGBY rigid, and it just talks a little bit more about coffee knowledge and our approach to the world. We try to get 50% of our coffee to be farm direct, and our travels associated with that. And then just some real cultural deep dives about the company. And so there's that. And then, you can find me as Bob Fish on Facebook, and I'm a prolific poster there. And then also I'm well engaged with LinkedIn, and I like to post there a lot too, just to talk to the outside world and, encourage people to keep moving along. I really try to send a positive message out there on a pretty regular basis so that people can keep the dream moving.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate all of your insights. It was eye-opening. Thank you so much for coming on the episode.
My pleasure. Thank
you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Franchise Marketing Podcast. If you found this episode useful, share it with a friend and subscribe now so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. And until then, happy marketing.